So, hi everybody, welcome to today's seminar. It's about sourcing data for the next generation of illicit finance research. I'm Liz David Barrett, and I'm the director of the GIACE programme, which is hosted at the Centre for the Study of Corruption at the University of Sussex. And this seminar is actually a collaboration between the GIACE programme and the Illicit Finance Data Lab. It's the second in a two-part series that we're doing with the Illicit Finance Data Lab. So if you missed the first one, do check out the video. It's on YouTube, and Alex is going to be putting the link in the chat during the seminar today. And also, if you're interested in hearing more about what we do at GIACE, do check out our newsletter. Again, we'll have a link that will be going into the chat. So in the first one of these, last time, we heard from two researchers from the GIACE programme about how they've used different forms of data to undertake academic research. And this time, we are going to be showcasing quite new cutting-edge efforts to reduce the barriers to working with complex data sets, with the idea of making data much more available, accessible, usable for academics, but also other practitioner users as well. So we're going to be looking at a whole load of solutions. We're going to be looking at inconsistencies in public, corporate, property and trade registries. We're going to be looking at how to deal with sensitive leaked data and hearing from journalistic organizations and people who are working with whistleblowers about all of the sensitivities of that. So just to tell you a little bit about what you're going to hear, we've got three sets of speakers. First of all, we're going to hear from Michelle Kendler Kretsch. She's a research fellow at the Anti-Corruption Data Collective, and she's going to be talking about using public registers beyond simple searches. Next, we're going to be hearing from the team at the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. So we've got Amra Jonlich-Zlatarevic and Alexandra Gillies, and they're going to be talking about their Aleph datasets and how to make that available for research. And then finally, we're going to be hearing from Milo Trujillo from the Network Science Institute at Northeastern University and Distributed Denial of Secrets. And he's going to be talking about that particular data archive and his observations on how to use it. So we're going to hear from those. They're going to be three 10-minute presentations. After that, we should still have a good 25 minutes for questions and answers. So while you're listening, do be thinking about what questions you'd like to ask the team. And we'll go to a Q&A session straight after Milo's presentation. So I will stop talking, and I'd like to hand over to Michelle. Michelle, if you would like to share your screen and get started.
Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting. I'm really excited to share what on the surface feels like maybe a topic that you're all familiar with, that you've been to a public registry before, but I wanted to dive down a little bit underneath the surface to explain some of the cases where there's really a hidden trove within public registries of potential data with great research questions. So just going to dive in right now. Basically, because of national requirements for public registries, the data is often richer than expected. There's a lot of interesting requirements that lead to interesting data, that lead to interesting research questions. And more registries are coming online in different parts of the world at the same time that some of the more famous ones are closing down, being more restricted. And so there's a push and a pull in the open registry world. This leads to the importance of archiving these registries, pulling the data so you're able to look and compare across registries or look over time. And two important organizations, Open Ownership and Open Corporates. Open Corporates provides corporate registry data that's publicly available. And Open Ownership is really one of the big organizations that's looking to open more registries under the same data format, which if you use their website, you can see which countries are using their data format, which are easy to work and compare across just given that they're in the same data structure. And I think that the last thing to really keep in mind with any open registry is often the front and the face of the registry is a search portal. You can search by director name, you can search by company name. And a lot of times the data itself that's most interesting to do work in illicit finance is actually within the actual filings themselves. And so the search portal is only one way to see the data. So I'll take Companies House for the UK registry. You can search by person, you can search by company name, but the company accounts are not searchable from that initial portal, but are hosted and publicly available and have really, really rich information. I, for example, found groups of companies that are all across the world that are within the UK registry related to arms trafficking, British arms trafficker saying he had companies in Uganda and Sudan, and Macedonia, just really opening up these cases. That's all locked away in filings. And so one of the things that I wanted to present is how can we think about corporate registries as rich data sources and using red flags and other indicators of illicit finance to find interesting trends that may not have been obvious or may not be searchable on first glance. So, what type of information is in corporate filings? Some of the things that I've observed looking at tons of registries in my time working on data teams and investigative journalism and at nonprofits. Bank account information, often you have to prove where the actual capital is coming from, import and export authorization, company purpose. The signatures can be really valuable to prove proxy relationships if you have the same signature for multiple different shareholders. Passport scans are becoming, I've been finding more and more of them sort of hidden in filings. Those are really rich data sources just because of all of the information that's on a passport and that they're official documentation and legal and power representatives and powers of attorney. Um, the the data lab is going to be doing more resources related to using AI tools, Gemini, Claude Code, to scrape without experience. But once you get to a registry, there's a lot of structured data in registries, whether that's the search portal or specific standard forms as part of filings. Those are pretty easy, depending on the website and web portal to pull, and then you have big data sources. Let's say you want to look at you can filter by company purpose, so you can compare all the companies that are in manufacturing, that sort of thing. But what's important is also to think about you've got unique identifiers that may be the company number, but often in the registries, if you can figure out what they're defining as the unique identifier, that can help you find more and more filings that may not be as clearly obvious from search portals, but may still be available publicly on the web. Once you have the identifier, again, it may be different than the company number, but pulling that. And then the last thing is that one of the pieces with the company number is often they're sequential. Obviously, as you create one company, you can find a new company. There's hidden companies sometimes if you actually are searching sequentially and making sure that you're pulling all the different companies that may not be on the search portal for whatever filters the search portal itself are using. Contact details is something that has been really powerful in investigative purposes, but is often under considered. These are things like emails, email domain can connect and compare different companies, whether that's the law firms that they're using or the companies themselves. You also have addresses, which can give you private property. It can give you commercial property, be foreign and domestic. These are ways that you can find foreignly related firms if the name or nationality of shareholder isn't available. And then you also have rural versus urban. So in thinking about contact detail, I think overall, it's how can you use what's often publicly available in cases where beneficial ownership is not available. There's still often a contact detail portion on registries, and these can give you indicators of foreign ownership, can give you indicators of related parties that may be outside the norm of thinking. But also on contact details, there's a validation piece. So we had a case looking at the DRC registry where Democratic Republic of the Congo, they were required to have an email for every company. And at first, we were finding emails that weren't working, that never existed. And we thought that they were putting fake contact details. But what ended up happening is that the government would just create an email if you didn't have one to fulfill their requirement of having contact details for all. So these are the types of things that when you're pulling data, there's some interesting things to look at scale that you may notice at one or two instances, but may have a pattern across the whole data set. Individual data, this can be tricky. Sometimes you're just given a name. Sometimes you're given a name and an ID number. Sometimes there's passport information. Again, that's a hugely rich area. And then once you have the names, tools like ChatGPT or Gemini are actually becoming more and more useful in doing things like probability of nationality based on naming conventions, transliterating at scale to allow you to look in other sources. So let's say you've got names in English, you'd be able to transliterate those into Arabic and compare and contrast potentially between an Arabic resource. And so these are the types of things that merging data is really, really valuable for a corporate registry, and that the use of LLMs and technology is lowering the barriers to cost to just make those probabilistic matches if you've got a partial date of birth. And then, as I mentioned, passports are a huge thing. You've got place of birth on passports, you've got year of issue, nationality, date of birth, a lot of rich information that's easily extractable because of the barcodes at the bottom. Secrecy jurisdictions, of course, is an important one. We've done some work related to identifying patterns where you've got similar time periods of registration with registered agent. Those can be grouped and clustered together. Most secrecy jurisdictions don't have good beneficial ownership. They probably only have a registered agent. And so that's when just the creative piece, thinking of a network approach, can be really valuable. The other piece is that we found cases where because you have beneficial ownership in a different jurisdiction, it exposes the owners in a secrecy jurisdiction. So if you have beneficial ownership registry in an Eastern European country that's got beneficial ownership information, and the owner of that company is in the British Virgin Islands, it will still say the beneficial owner, and you can extract who's the beneficial owner of the BVI from there. So putting together a couple different corporate registries that have beneficial owner looking for secrecy jurisdictions can actually open up the secrecy side of that if you can do it at scale across a couple different corporate registries. And more of them have beneficial ownership now as a requirement. Okay, taking a quick few examples to talk about how you might look at data within a corporate registry and think about different questions. So nationality, there's not often an ability to search on nationality in corporate registries, but in organized data, there's often a nationality component to shareholder information. So if you can extract each profile for a company, then you can pull that in a sheet and look at nationality. You can look for things like sanctions evasion, golden passports for countries that offer those, tax evasion at scale. Another thing to look at is dates of registration. If you can pull those at scale for a corporate registry, you can see trends, spikes, suspicious activity related to dates. Maybe that's related to the invasion by Russia in Ukraine, or a specific date that happened in country in the domestic politics. And by doing this at scale, looking at something like nationality and looking for those red flags and trends, that's when you'll also not only find the red flags you know about, like sanctions evasion by, say, North Korea, but also potentially red flags that you weren't aware of when you see spikes and unusual patterns in the data. Maybe there's a lot of people from a given country in the registry that doesn't have a lot of trade with that country, doesn't have a diaspora with that country. This may flag suspicious behavior that you can look to and investigate. Another one I mentioned before, sequential order of files. One of the projects I've worked on looking in Zimbabwe is finding that military-related companies were pulled from the registry. So every time there wasn't an available filing, when you went sequentially, you were starting to see military ties with those specific countries because they were actually pulled by the government out of the registry. So that can open up more questions. Just looking sequentially at companies, what's skipped. Wagner companies have been pulled from registries across Central and West Africa as well. And then company form is the last one. Um, doing some analysis on what companies are doing, what banks they're banking at for different forms may highlight what they're being used for. And all of this is, again, if you're pulling registries and you're looking and analyzing across various different data fields. One last thing is a network approach. So we've pulled data from across the registry into network graphs that allow us to see trends like clusters, centrally important nodes. And this is where combining contact detail registered agent addresses can actually put particularly something like sanctions evasions networks into play. We are able to map out Dan Gertler, who's a corrupt mining mogul out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, his network, all through looking at a network approach of the DRC registry, just pulling that en masse and being able to find companies that were under proxies and aliases. So that's just a highlight, just a quick rundown of various different things that you're able to do with corporate registries that you might not have thought of before.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I've learned a lot there, and that really appreciate that very practical approach to if you see this, then you can do that, or it might mean this. So super useful. Excellent. We're going to move on then to OCCRP. We're going to start with Amra, and Amra, you're going to tell us about the Aleph dataset.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everybody for joining this webinar. So my colleague Alex and I were going to be talking mostly about streamlining data access and collaboration and why Aleph Pro is kind of important for academic researchers. So OCCRP is a global network of investigative journalists, and we are really into data sets, data, and data tools, and that's one of our specialty, and we develop it, and then we share it with our network, which kind of brings us slowly into what Aleph Pro is, how is it organized, and how to search, and how do we actually use it. Alex, thank you. So Aleph Pro is basically an investigative data platform, and it contains millions and millions of public records, corporate data, land records, court records, and then leaked information from all around the globe. And there's more than hundreds of media organizations who are users of Aleph. So how is all of this possible, and how do we actually use it for the benefits of our investigations? So Aleph Pro is a bit different when you compare it to mainstream search engines, let's say Google. Aleph Pro basically uses three main components in itself. First one is entity searches. The second one is cross-reference. And then the third one is creation of private or public workspaces for data collaboration. So what does all of this mean? Entity searches basically refer when you're searching for a person's name, you're searching for a company, you're searching for a particular asset. It can be real estate, even when you're searching for money transactions. Cross-reference is a second segment of Aleph Pro where you're basically using one data set, and then you're able to cross-reference that data set with rest of Aleph. And by doing so, you're cross-referencing maybe with sanctions list or other leaked data sets that we have in Aleph, because your end goal is to uncover complex and hidden connection of network of companies and people. And the last part is the workspace, which you can create, as I said, for private purposes or for public. You can upload documents, you can upload data. If you want to OCR certain PDFs and translate them, you can create visualization graphs of the findings and your search entities within that workspace. And in the end, you can basically share that workspace with other users in Aleph, so you can jointly work together on data. So how is all of this possible, and what's basically the magic behind OCCRP's Aleph Pro? So Aleph Pro is basically powered by an open source module called Follow the Money. So what does this module does for our data in Aleph Pro? So it basically takes unstructured data and it transforms it into structured and searchable data. It also allows us to give attributes to entities, and it showcases the relationship between different search entities. So how to explain this in more simple terms? If your entity search is a person, attributes of that person would be identifiers such as date of birth, ID number, passport number, maybe a registered address of that particular individual. If your entity search is the name of a company, then identifiers of that company would be the trade registry number, date of incorporation, the status of the company, whether it's active or struck off or just simply closed due to liquidation, or maybe a registered address of that particular company. Additionally to this, with having search entities and then having attributes of those entities, we also have the relationship between different search entities. Basically, Aleph allows you to kind of see who are the shareholders, who are the UBOs, and what's the relationship between a person and a company, or maybe even a financial transaction. Whether a company has subsidiaries, which are the managers, who are the previous or the current managers, and so on. So basically, why this is important for academic researchers, and why we think it would be highly valuable for academic researchers to kind of use Aleph as much as possible for their own research. Alex, maybe the next slide. Thank you so much. So basically, I think that there are kind of like three main points why Aleph Pro access would really matter for academic researchers. First of all, you'll get access to non-public data sets. And I think that's always interest for every researcher to kind of see what lies beyond having that overall public access. The second part is that you can do bulk data analysis, especially if you're approaching more with like quantitative research in comparison to qualitative research. And then you're also getting API access to Aleph. And then the third part is that you can basically do custom knowledge graphs based on the data that you compiled, and you want to visualize all of your findings and research process that you did, which is kind of useful, and you can share it with other users in Aleph, and you can collaborate with other people on that particular visualizations. So when it comes to the data sharing with academic researchers, so there are different levels of access to Aleph. And one that we really discussed could be the most beneficial for academic researchers is to be part of something that we like to call bar group. So bar group is basically one level above publicly available data, and we share the data sets within this group with researchers, academics, freelance journalists, and activists, and it does contain some sensitive information to a certain degree, and we think it would be irresponsible to make this information publicly available, but if it would stand on its own, it wouldn't do any serious harm. And between hundreds of data sets, I kind of pulled out two to kind of explain you that vision of how it could be useful for academic researchers. So we have Montenegro Citizenship Program. So basically the content of the data set is that it's list of people who received citizenship in Montenegro between 2008 and 2023. And for an academic researcher, it might be interesting to find different trends and patterns throughout the year for these applicants. The second example can be Russian Minister of Emergency Documents. So basically, these are documents which have been published by the Russian Minister of Energies and Emergencies, and then for academic researcher, it might be an interest to actually track bureaucratic priorities, to see how the resources have been allocated, what's the power dynamics behind all of these plans that can be seen in the documents. And I kind of want to conclude this because we really and strongly believe that it's important for journalists and academic researchers to collaborate on these things. And we are planning in the next coming years kind of to adjust the sign-in form and specialize it for academic researchers. So when you're applying for access to Aleph Pro, you will have a specialized sign-in form specifically for academic journalists. We also want to create a better guidance document to kind of show you how to navigate Aleph and what exists in the bar group and what are the core elements of these data sets that exist in the bar group. And also we want to provide you next to this like certain information about some data sets that we think you might find interesting. So the main reason why we're doing all of this is because we want to engage more with the academic researchers, and we want to really work hard on that engagement with the community, because we already know that we have academics who are using Aleph, but I think the engagement part, we weren't the best on that side. So I think this is an amazing opportunity to do so. And I'm handing over the mic to my colleague, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amra. And just a couple quick comments to complement what you've said. I mean, Aleph Pro was built very much with journalistic collaborations in mind. And so figuring out how we can work with researchers using the data that OCCRP has, it's really a matter of experimentation. We've tried a few things. We're going to keep trying a few things. We're trying to figure out how best to make it happen. And so we do really want to engage with audiences like this one on this kind of journey. But the motivation for this is a real appreciation that we're sitting on more data than we can use, and we really need to work together in different ways, particularly given the complexity of the illicit finance, corruption, organized crime issues that we all care about. We've got to find different ways to combine our respective expertise in order to get more public interest value out of this data. These collaborations make sense because of the kind of complementary skills that exist in journalism, in academia, and they can take a few different forms. And I want to just illustrate those a little bit to bring it to life. In some collaborations that we've had so far, it really is just a matter of sharing data. Researchers often collect and have very interesting data sets that have investigative potential, but also sharing expertise as well. I mean, one example is, like everyone else, we're trying to kind of up our game on crypto. And so we've been reaching out to some of the leading academics on crypto and thinking about, they're interested in our data, we're interested in their expertise. What's a responsible way to move forward? Even looking at the same data set, researchers and journalists ask very different questions, often with researchers more interested in kind of macro issues, looking at trends over time, and apply different methodologies. I mean, even across the two previous presentations, the way academics do network analysis and the way journalists do it is quite different, and both have their strengths and purposes. And then the last is, just sharing innovations and how to access data. There's lots of beneficial ownership registers that are publicly available, but there's lots of others that are a huge pain in the butt to try to get. And so how can we work together to get more public data and share what we have? But also in an analysis. I mean, we had a cool collaboration with the University of Exeter last year where their computer science team develop an AI tool to extract structured data from a bunch of corporate registration documents that we had in a very popular offshore jurisdiction. And we didn't have the capacity in-house at that time to build that AI tool. So just two quick examples of how this can actually generate really great outputs. This is an investigation that we published last month. Hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts going from a state-owned mining company in Uzbekistan to companies in the UK, Korea, elsewhere that just had the reddest of red flags associated with them. This is one of my favorite stories. I urge you guys to check it out. But some of the initial data came from an academic colleague, Chris Laslett, who some of you may know, teaches at the University of Ulster. And he saw the newsworthy value of the data he was collecting. And so this great product came out of it, and I'm sure he'll do great research with it as well. Another example is, a couple years ago, with the support of a partner called C4ADS, we got a leak of Dubai property data. The journalist looked through that data and identified lots of PEPs, organized crime figures, sanctioned individuals who own property in Dubai. Here's a couple crypto scammers. So that was the kind of analysis we did. But then there were a few academic colleagues at the EU Tax Observatory who asked very different questions and kind of looked at this microdata to better understand kind of large scale offshore flows. So those are just a few examples of how this collaboration can look. In order to foster it, we've partnered with the Anti-Corruption Data Collective to form the Illicit Finance Data Lab. This is a place where, as we figure out how to make Aleph more useful for academics, this is where we'll post the updates. This is where we're posting updates about these kinds of collaborations. And so I'll put the link in the chat to where you can get on to this online platform and stay updated and figure out great ways for us to work together in the future. Back to you, Liz. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much, Alex. It's really fascinating to see how this is evolving and to see those examples of how journalists and academics use the same data in different ways. Really great. Okay, so on to Milo. Milo, are you all set to go? And just a reminder for our audience, if you've got questions, comments about any of these presentations, you'll have time to ask them after Milo's presentation. So do think about what you'd like to ask. Over to you, Milo.
Great, thank you. Let me get that out of the way. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Milo Trujillo. I'm a postdoc and adjunct lecturer at Northeastern University and a longtime data scientist at Distributed Denial of Secrets. And so I'll be talking today some about our work on whistleblowing data for journalists and researchers and our experiences and lessons learned so far working with academics on this kind of data. Great. So in general, Distributed Denial of Secrets is a publisher. We publish leaked, hacked, scraped, and sometimes mirrored data that is in the public interest. We maintain a number of search engines for analyzing those leaked documents, write analysis tools for particular data sets. Sometimes we're able to collaborate directly with researchers or journalists on some data sets. Other times we're able to organize collaborations between different third parties that have some shared interests and complementary skills. And so I'll be talking a little bit more about each of these things. Great. The general pipeline, we receive data, we decide, is this of the public interest? If it is, great. Does it contain any personally identifying information, a lot of private data that could be abused if shared widely? If no, wonderful. Publish it publicly, release it via torrent, let the world have it. Otherwise, is it easy to strip that information out and create a redacted data set and share that publicly? If so, do that. But in either case, also publish a limited distribution data set that's only available to, much like OCCRP was just talking about, journalists and academics that we're confident will not abuse this data. In general, most of our data is submitted directly to us, whether that's whistleblowers within organizations reaching out to us or hackers that have obtained information. But sometimes we'll also mirror existing publications, whether that's hackers that have released their own data publicly or ransomware gangs that have released corporate data, or more recently mirroring the Department of Justice and the Epstein files before they started retracting some of those files. So, brief overview of kind of our sites and where to find all of this. Our main site, tdsecrets.org, we have articles about every release that we've made. These include, short blurb about what's in this data set, all of the metadata about how big is it? Does it come from a leak or a hack? What country is it in, etc. We also aggregate all of the media coverage that we found so far about this data set. And often when journalists are covering our data, they will reach out to us and say, hey, here's the piece that we've been working on. And so we're able to link together everything uncovered so far about what's in these documents. Then at data.ddsecrets.org, we have public downloads for all of our public data sets, or you can download faster via torrent. Self-explanatory. Then we run two instances of the Aleph search engine, one for all of our public data sets, which you can find at libraryofleaks.org, and then one for the limited distribution data sets. Amra and Alex have just talked extensively about the great capabilities of Aleph, so I will move on, except to say that while Aleph is fantastic for working with email and financial data and office documents and PDFs, it isn't perfectly suited to every kind of data. And in particular, we have a lot of data sets that come from chat logs, whether that's Discord or Telegram or Rocket Chat or Gab, etc. And so we maintain our own search infrastructure specifically for that kind of data that just has the taxonomies built in about users active in rooms across chat servers, etc. At times, we've managed crowdsourcing of analysis of a lot of data. Uh, Probably the main example of that was the Bahamas registry. We had a large number of PDFs of corporate registrations, but those PDFs were in an enormous number of different formats, and many of them had handwritten data, and optical character recognition was just not doing the job to auto-extract these fields, especially back then when we didn't have as advanced AI tools for doing this kind of work. And so we built this web infrastructure for crowdsourcing everybody, converting this into a machine-readable database for future analysis, and that worked out quite well. Other times, we've been able to set up analysis scripts for particular releases, especially when they were released in extremely tedious formats. So we've had a couple where it's like, okay, here's a database dump, but some of the tables of the database contain nested JSON. And so really it's like 3 or 4 layers of tables within tables within tables, and it's just very obtuse and hard to work with. And so, okay, we'll release the original data as it was presented to us, but we'll also release these analysis scripts that help to unpack that data or take the most salient portions and convert it into spreadsheets or SQLite databases, CSV, whatever is more convenient for analysts. And occasionally, when resources permit, we've also been able to make bespoke data exploration tools for some releases. Micah made this a few days ago. Web exploration tool for the Department of Homeland Security contracts. So you can zoom in on your region and be like, okay, near me, what are all of the corporations that have contracts with DHS? When did they get those contracts? How much money are they for? What are the details on what they've specifically been contracted for, etc. So far, we've managed about 400 releases and roughly 200 terabytes of data across the globe, with a skew towards United States sources, but as you can see, broader coverage than that. So here today, we're especially interested in academic work, and so we have a few case studies to talk about with different levels of involvement and different roles on our end. In the case of Blue Leaks, we were analyzing a number of leaked memos from cross-jurisdictional law enforcement fusion centers. And so we were able to embed with the research team and work alongside them for about a year and both publish academically and get this report in front of the state of Maine legislature. So that was a wonderful success story. Other times, research labs have wanted us to be a little bit less involved. When we worked with Humber College, they were really interested in looking at a lot of Canadian ransomware data. We had many conversations with their research team and their university administration to talk about provenance of the data, what is likely to be in the data, what's not, what portions are going to be relevant to them, what they're trying to stay away from, and negotiate how to synchronize many terabytes of this data with their university. Other times, it's been less of a formal interaction with both Gab Leaks and the .win network. So that's the Donald.win, Great Awakening.win, all of those awful forums. Academics got the data first, began their analysis, and then wrote to us later saying, hey, we've started, we have these great questions that we're working on, but this data is really obtuse. Could you help us kind of dig in and get started? And yeah, sure, okay. And we were able to write these analysis scripts to help unpack the data a little bit for them. So some common academic challenges that we've seen from these groups and ways that we can help with some of that. A lot of questions that we get from academics are about data provenance and risky contents and how to get IRB approval for these kinds of studies. And so, for example, we've had people reach out saying, okay, we're excited to work with this data, but our university has said under absolutely no circumstances can we have any stolen credit card information on our university servers. Can you guarantee that that is not in this data set before we begin working? And well, okay, we haven't looked at every single line, but from both our analysis and from speaking with all of the journalists that have looked at this data set so far, no one has found any credit card information. We can be relatively confident that isn't going to be in there, and that's made it possible for these groups to be comfortable working with that data. Likewise with like social security numbers, or especially with the Epstein files, worried about child sexual abuse material. We've also had questions about how data was procured. Academics are often very concerned with both, not just how do we know that this data is legitimate, but how do we know whether this is a complete sample, or if it was subsampled, then by what means was it subsampled? Is this a biased data set in some way? Like, we can still work with that, but you need to know in what way is it subselected from the broader set of documents. And so we can't always answer those questions, but we're often able to speak some about how the data was procured and what we know and make that more approachable. We're also able to cite some previous studies that have gotten IRB approval for work with these data sets, or previous studies that have argued for IRB exemption when they have corporate information or public social media posts and can argue like this is not human subject data, and so it isn't under the purview of the IRB. We're able to kind of direct new academics to cases where that has worked in the past. Another common challenge we get is where to start, and this can be great, we're excited about this topic. This is a massive dump of emails and PDFs. What's in here? What questions are we likely to be able to answer? We would rather not invest a couple months reading through enough of this material to get a sense of whether this is even something that we are interested in. And so this is where we try to get as much use as we can out of aggregating existing journalistic coverage and saying, okay, maybe you're interested in different questions than what the journalists were studying, but they've at least been able to map out a lot of what is and isn't in this data set and can help you understand what questions might be answerable before you invest a lot of time to dig into the data set. And finally, we've had some academics reach out to us when they hit challenges with their analysis, whether that's just because the skill sets in their team are divergent or because they have a small team and deadlines, etc. We're often able to help with very small hurdles, things like, hey, do you need this database converted into a spreadsheet because you don't have database people on your team? Okay, we can do that. Sometimes we're able to be much more involved on more in-depth analysis, and whenever possible, we like to put researchers and journalists in contact, start collaborations, get resource sharing working, again, whether that's people with complementary expertise or shared interests, and so on. So that is my opening spiel. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the ongoing discussion.
Thanks so much, Milo. This is so exciting. Also, just from an academic point of view, to see how much help is on offer, actually. So not just how much the field is evolving, but if you're an early career researcher or even an ancient researcher, then you can go and get help with what's available and how to use it. So it's really very exciting. It's time to open up to the audience. We've got 15, 18 minutes to chat about this. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, but if anyone else would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand and you can come on and be part of the conversation and ask your question. While we're waiting for shy people to raise their hands, I'm going to read out a couple of questions that we've got from the chat. So we've got one from Human Zanuzi. He is, I think it's a he. He says, I'm a PhD researcher on financial crime, focusing on Russia, China, and Iran, and also a Sussex alumnus. That's great to hear. And his question, research has exposed large Azerbaijani financial networks in Europe designed to influence political narratives. How can researchers use open data or leaked data sets to identify whether similar influence is occurring through funding of think tanks or policy institutes in the UK? Okay, so that's one question. Then we've got a question from Stephen Abbott Pugh. He's talking about the fact that by July of this year, all EU member states are due to give legitimate interest access to beneficial ownership registries in line with the sixth anti-money laundering directive. He's been doing work on those, and there's sort of mixed evidence on how they're doing with it. But his question is, none of the EU member state registers that he's seen offer bulk beneficial ownership data sets for journalists or researchers. He's made the case to the Irish registrar that they should offer bulk data, but how could groups on this call advocate for more bulk data access in the EU? So we've got two questions there. We've also, Agatha has raised her hand. Agatha, can we come to you to ask your question? If you'd like to briefly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Can you hear me well?
We can hear you,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. Yeah, so thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative. So my name is Agatha. I work for the platform to protect whistleblowers in Africa, working on investigations, and Pierre, my colleague, is also present. And I just had a question on, so we typically tend to, so this was very helpful because we work on investigations related to corruption, money laundering, and illicit finance in general. And you mentioned at the beginning that passport numbers and identity numbers were very helpful. And I was wondering if you could elaborate just a little bit on how you can use that kind of data to find more information about the person or the networks that you're researching.
That's great. Thanks very much. So let's take that group of questions for starters. But if other people have questions, again, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. And I'm going to suggest that we start with Milo. Then we're going to go to Michelle, then Amra, and then Alex. So Milo. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Please come back to me if that's okay. I'm thinking about what
Okay,
data sets we have
absolutely
access
no
to.
problem.
Yes.
Can we come to you, Michelle? We've got a couple on beneficial ownership. And in fact, we've got another question in the chat about beneficial ownership registries. Researcher from Colombia, any perspective about Latin America, where we don't in general have access to beneficial ownership registries? So do you have any advice on where to look to address that shortcoming? Michelle?
Sure. I'll take them in not the correct order, but the ones that are clearest to me. So we'll start with passports. I think there's a couple things to think about passports. One is you've got the date of birth, and of course that can be used to match with dates of birth that you have. Another is you've got official spelling and official transliteration by the government who authorized that passport. That can be helpful because then you can start to, particularly names that are getting transliterated by other sources. Sometimes having more than one version of the official name per the government can be helpful in comparing to transliterations that are being used by the person themselves if they're trying to do, let's say, a sanctions evasion. We've seen cases where they're deliberately mistransliterating, but you can sort of see in the passport how it should be transliterated. The place of birth, let's take a golden passport example. You've got citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis who have place of birth in countries like Iran or Russia. Whether or not they are a naturalized citizen of St. Kitts outside of a golden passport is still an open question, but these are giving you indicators that can be very powerful in thinking about whether or not that shift of, this is another like potential sanctions evasion tactic. The year of issue can also be very valuable, again, in the golden passport, but also secondary passports. So if you're looking at comparing, let's say, a US visa programs or various nationalization programs, and you can see dates of issue, that may be helpful. So I think what's interesting about passports is because there's a standard form, they're very easy to extract the data, and the data is very rich depending on the question that you're particularly asking. And particularly these trying to figure out whether a person is using a different passport than the nationality you know them to be. Political elites being probably the clear example as well. Some PEPs have those golden passports or other things. We've also, South Sudan, in the certain countries have like your job or your profession in passports. So we've seen like son of president on a passport before, which obviously gives you an indicator. On Latin America, so it is really tough when you have countries that don't have registries. More countries than you realize have official gazettes that can be proxies for registries. So these are publications by the government every week, every month, whatever cadence they are, of just sometimes it's very limited information of just dates, companies, maybe a registered agent that are published in these gazettes. And then from there, you can build not a full corporate registry, but sometimes those patterns are still available. So you can see maybe when a suspicious number of companies were created on the same day. You can see names of companies that are very similar to find groups. Another one that this is like a very silly example, but I find it very interesting. Misspelled companies. If you're not actually doing business in the company, misspelling it doesn't really particularly matter. And so that can be an indicator of shell activity or quickly incorporated companies for all sorts of various reasons. These are things that even an incredibly limited gazette or official, I'm struggling to remember which Latin American countries have this, but I do know a couple of them don't have registries, but do have this gazette concept. So that could be something to look into. Um, Bulk data access for registries. I think one of the advocacy questions is convincing, a lot of these are getting closed for privacy reasons. And so getting really clear about the types of research questions that can be done without exposing that privacy, that might be an avenue to start to open up bulk data that's looking for trend. Okay, take my misspelled example. You could just get a list of all the companies, their incorporation dates, and just run them for misspellings. And that could be a useful research question that doesn't expose the underlying persons involved. Now, that may be very limited in what you can actually say in the research, but I think sometimes trying to hone in on a specific ask might be useful, but I think the privacy question really limits some of the research and especially the journalistic side, but definitely the research side, depending on what your goal is. If you're trying to match those people to politicians or to other trade, like, tax data or something like that that requires the name and the privacy concerns. That answers, I didn't get to the think tank one, but I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Michelle, for answering those. I don't know if Alex or Amra want to take the one around dark money and think tanks in the UK, whether there are data sets that might help with analyzing that.
Maybe Alex can tackle that. I wanted to kind of discuss the UBO question.
Okay, go ahead.
So basically, in my line of work, as I'm kind of working on the research and data side with OCCRP, the UBO and how to get information on UBO is like a never-ending question for us. So with all the changes with the European Union policies about the jurisdiction within Europe being a bit more open and disclosing the UBO, we all got pretty much excited, but then we noticed a pattern that it's not so straightforward how to get that information. There's no standardized procedure that every single country kind of follows. Some of the people in the comments basically explained that there's difference between how it's being done in Ireland in comparison to like Malta, where there's a case by case situation. So on that end, again, in terms of perceiving it as from a journalistic point of view, we at OCCRP are definitely advocating for the European Union that the bulk data is kind of open and available for journalists, and we are open for collaboration. But we do have the same issues and problems as other people on this chat who wrote questions about the problems of finding the UBO data. So any ideas for potential collaboration, please do reach out to us, because we are seriously looking into this and trying to figure out a way how to obtain UBO information, because we do believe that's in like interest of the public to have that information presented for journalists.
That's great. Alex, do you want to come in on that other question, or we can
Yeah,
also go and take some more
so
questions?
on the Azerbaijan question, I nothing in particular comes to mind, but it raises kind of a broader point that, like, OCCRP and organizations like it, and we've done lots of investigations over the years on many different topics. Azerbaijan happens to be a country that we've written a lot about over the years, with wanting to bring about more collaborations with researchers. um, we want to be in touch more, right? So, like, if you see an investigation that we published that relied on data that you think has strong research potential, that's the kind of conversation we want to be able to have through this illicit finance data lab that we've set up. Will we be able to do that at scale immediately on a million different topics? No, but it's really worthwhile starting to have those conversations. So that's kind of the generic answer I would give to that specific question, is that if there's, investigations about Azerbaijan that seem particular to what research you think needs to be done, let's talk about that. And it's a kind of a similar answer to one of the questions in the chat, which is about whether the Dubai property data is available on Aleph Pro. I mean, currently it's available on Aleph Pro to certain users. And so if you sign up as a researcher, no, that will not be available to you. But some researchers have used it. They got the permissions, they went through the conversations in order to get access. And so unfortunately, there's no responsible automatic way to just hit a button and give, thousands of researchers access to thousands of data sets. It has to be much more tailored than that. But beginning to have those conversations is what we want to do. So please reach out and we can, try to make a few flowers bloom in this space.
That's great. Thanks very much, Alex. I'm going to go to Irena, who has her hand up for probably a final question, and then we'll come back to all of the panel members for any last words. Irena, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm Irene Tello. I'm currently a PhD student at Central European University, but I also write for a Mexican journal, El Universal. And I wanted to ask you because I think it's so important to bridge this gap between academia and journalism, but I also think that unfortunately, uh, both fields work on the very different ethical frameworks. I don't know how to say it. Like in academia, there's a lot of emphasis on not publishing sensitive information to focusing more on trends. And journalism is the other way around about actually disclosing these cases and possible wrongdoing. So I'm thinking, how do you think about approaching this very sensitive tension between these two fields? Also, in an area where privatization is being so weaponized and actually being used to block access to such important data sets like beneficial ownership transparency.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, so we have basically 1 minute left per team. I'm going to suggest we go Michelle, Milo, and then OCCRP team. Michelle?
I think earlier in the chat, Alex posted the form to sign up for the Illicit Finance Data Lab's website. We actually did an entire article looking at these tensions in ethical and legal differences between journalists and researchers. Very fascinating. I mean, I think, it's like if your goal is to completely anonymize a data set, well, that makes it very challenging to write a story as a journalist. I mean, the tensions are very, very clear. And I think early conversations and collaborations and some of the work, that the OCCRP team has been describing in trying to formulate those and learn from them, learn from the experience on the researcher side. What are your challenges? How can, Milo was talking about, actually talking to ethics boards and having those conversations. I think all of that it's going to be just lessons learned. But the article goes into some of the tensions. And then I think there's a real goal to looking for solutions. But I do think because this is not like a natural marriage, it takes work. And so that's where we sit at ACDC for sure.
That's great. Thanks so much, Michelle. Milo.
Yeah, I mean, as an academic myself, I feel some of that same tension about not just differing research questions, but differing expectations about what you make public and what you don't. And it is a bit of a push and pull. I see, at least my subfields, we're starting to see a bit of a shift in academia and some more acceptance of more direct work and naming. Especially, I work in a lot of like social media and alt-right data, and there's more acceptance of like, okay, well, we're violating terms of service to even talk about these sites and gather any data from these sites, and that's okay because the public interest outweighs the privacy rights, especially when these are accounts that are public facing, that are putting some information out there. But it is often a really nuanced conversation about like, well, to what extent is there an expectation of privacy versus information being put out publicly, and how does that align with academic standards? So there's not an easy answer for that, other than we are slowly building precedents and more work in this area will make it easier to do more work in this area.
That's great. Thanks very much. Definitely, it's a very iterative process. Amra, final
I
word
want
from you?
I just wanted to kind of add something. It's similar to what Alex mentioned about like data, and then it kind of correlates to whether certain things should be public or should be closed or open data. So there is a reason why at OCCRP, when we're talking about Aleph Pro, there are different levels of access to data. And that's why Alex mentioned that, like, yes, Dubai data does exist, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll open it to every single academic here. And that's basically your answer on our end, let's say, as a journalist, how we protect the information that exists in these leaks and some private information of individuals, meaning their identifiers and certain things that people necessarily don't want to be have their out there public. So I think it's very important that even with the data on OCCRP and like the data that we have in Aleph Pro, we are taking a lot of measures to make sure that this data is secured. And that's why we have numerous layers of access and security checks before we're actually willing to share the data. So to a certain degree, we do understand the data that we are using most potentially is leaked, but we're taking all the measurements in order to deal with the data with the most precaution that we can, so we don't actually violate anybody's rights, and we protect their privacy to a certain degree.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And Alex, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just thanks all for coming, and hopefully we can do something similar in a year or two and have, a bunch of other collaborations, large and small, that have been made possible. But thanks for bringing this group together, Liz.
Yeah, and thank you all for attending. I mean, fantastic turnout. I think that's a real testament to how excited people are about this potential collaboration that's happening. Lots of questions in the chat, people networking in the chat. So, yeah, we'd really like to foster this community. So, thanks everybody for joining, and do make those connections and stay in touch and keep the conversation going.